Thank you all for joining us today, and please make sure and join the conversation on Twitter at #WDAY. It is my privilege today to introduce our speaker, Jason Aberbrook. Jason is the Chief Business Innovation Officer at Aperio, a very fitting title for a very innovative individual. Jason has over 20 years of experience in the HR and workforce technology space. He's been a revolutionary, thought leader, and influencer in the area of technology and people and their alignment. Prior to Aperio, Jason was the CEO of Knowledge Infusion, a company he co-founded. Named one of the 10 most influential thought leaders in the HR technology space, Jason is a wonderful writer, charismatic speaker, and has been infusing knowledge, helping to guide people as they embark on their HR journeys, as well as shape their thinking of their organizations. He's driving the HR world from now to next with his new book, which is aptly titled. And with that, I give you Jason Aberbrook and our panel of Workday customers to share how they are driving engagement and creating a culture of adoption. Jason.
Great, thanks, Christina, and thanks for the nice introduction. As Christina said, my name is Jason Aberbrook. Role as Chief Business Innovation Officer with Aperio, and you can see the slide there with a picture of what I looked like a long time ago. We are lucky enough today to have three esteemed panelists joining us as well. So before I jump into a few minutes of pre-content, I thought I would take a second to have the panelists introduce themselves as well. And you can get a look at them here, three serious chaps. John Semple, Colin Joynt, and Stephen Francis. So, John, I'm going to ask you real quickly if you could introduce yourself, your role, and just a little about what you do at McGraw-Hill Education.
Sure. Thanks, Jason, and hi. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is John Semple. I'm the Director of HRMS for McGraw-Hill Education. We are a publishing company, recently spun off from our parent company back in 2013. We had to, in a sense, stand ourselves up from the parent company to create an infrastructure within ourselves, and made the decision to go with Workday, to basically achieve that goal. My job here at McGraw-Hill Education is, for the most part, to handle just about everything from a functional perspective in the Workday system, whether that be the HCM core, talent, setup of an administration of business processes, etc. Currently, we're using most of HCM core to include talent, succession, compensation, merit, which of course is included in compensation. We're using a little bit of payroll. We are working with an external vendor where you're not using the benefits, nor are we using the financial modules.
Great, John, thanks. And where are you based?
I'm sorry, we're based in Columbus, Ohio.
Great, thank you. Next, we'll move on to Colin. Colin, a little bit of an introduction there from you would be great.
Great. Thanks, Jason, and good morning, good afternoon, everyone. As Jason mentioned, my name is Colin Joynt. I'm the Director of the PMO here at Interactive Intelligence. Interactive Intelligence is a global organization. We're in 23 countries around the world. Our core business is communications as a platform or as a service. So our Workday implementation has been in production now for just about a year. The reason we put in the Workday platform was to consolidate disparate HR systems to enable our approximately 1,500 global team members. From a footprint perspective, we use core HR. We do use benefits as well. We've also leveraged payroll, and we've extensively used the integration capabilities within the platform, along with custom integrations to tie to our various supporting systems from an HR perspective. And we are based just down the road from John, ironically enough, in Indianapolis, Indiana.
Great. Thanks, Colin. Look forward to your stories here in a few seconds. And last but not least, Stephen Francis. Stephen, I think you're a little bit further west than these guys. Maybe you could introduce yourself and your company.
Hey, thanks. I'm Stephen Francis, and I'm actually out in Denver, Colorado, and I'm the VP of Finance and Information Technology. I work for a privately held mortgage bank, W.J. Bradley, and about a year ago, the company implemented Workday, and the profile of what we implemented was the HRIS, Human Capital Management, benefits, performance management. We have a landscape that includes some integrations out to our recruiting solution. And then we also implemented the full suite of the Workday financial products from the general ledger, accounts payable, expense reimbursements. So W.J. Bradley decided to go with a fully integrated back office system in an attempt to move more towards self-service in terms of driving productivity and process improvement and efficiency in the back office.
That's great. Thanks, you guys. So we're going to get into an interactive discussion with these three panelists in a few minutes. And as Christina mentioned earlier on, and as the WebEx operator announced earlier on, your questions are going to be key to this. So we'll be very angry if you guys don't ask questions. So please chat some questions. For those of you not on Twitter, please go to Twitter. Yes, Apple did announce an iWatch, but try to pay attention to this webinar instead of watching some of the Apple news coming along. Christina mentioned a book that I just wrote. It came out June 2nd, HR From Now to Next. And really the purpose of this book was to help HR audiences, IT audiences, and business audiences truly understand where HR is today and where HR is respectively in each of their organizations and where next might be. And understand next looks different everywhere you go. There's not one next. There's lots of different nexts. And the panelists we put together today really do a great job of laying out where they are. And you'll see they're all in different spots, but they're all in different spots for different reasons. A few of the key concepts in the book that I want to make sure I talk about first of all before we jump into the panelists. Number one, Workplace 2020. Everyone remembers Y2K and how much money, time, resource was spent on preparing for Y2K. I truly think where HR today is in a similar spot in having to prepare for Workplace 2020. We're 5 years away from 2020, and I think the combination of the workforce combined with the technology, combined with the business challenges, create an opportunity like never before. You're going to hear from three companies today that have already made this plunge and started to prepare and hear where they are on their journeys. But for a lot of other organizations, they haven't started yet. And this concept of Workplace 2020 is something key that I think should be embedded in every one of your strategies going forward. You know, we look at who has better technology today, us as consumers or the business. And in almost every case, we as consumers have better technology than the business does. That being said, and even if you look at how much interest there is in some of these new devices being announced today by Apple, it's crazy. So we continue to have consumers having better technology than we do as businesses for the first time ever, and that's just going to keep growing and growing and growing. And what that does is it sets the expectation that the technology you use has to be developed for the workforce. It has to be developed for the workplace. It can't be developed for the HR audience. How many of you sleep with your device? You know, we get closer and closer to having these devices embedded into us, from the iWatch to whatever we're going to swallow to keep track of where we are, to the Internet of Things, to bringing our device home. It wasn't that long ago where we used to leave our device at work. Now we're sleeping with it. The concept of being connected and always connected is key, and it will continue to be key as you drive forward how you want to roll things out. And as you roll things out, one of the things I talk about in the book a lot is how do you move from adoption to addiction? So adopting technology alone isn't enough. How many times a year do people change their address? Once every 3 years. How many times a year do you have a baby? You know, hopefully not more than once every 3 or 4 years. How many times a year do you get married or divorced? You know, hopefully not once every more than whatever years. You know, if those are the things you're going in to record in your system, you're not going to become addicted to it, and I hope you don't. You know, you might remember to do it once in a while when those time comes, but that's not going to drive addiction. If you checked your email once every 5 years, would you become addicted? Facebook once every 5 years? Would you become addicted? No. So moving from adoption to addiction means we have to think about what adds value to the workforce and how do we roll that out. And to me, that comes in what I call the measure of now. And that's not looking backwards. It's looking today at exactly how employees are thinking, how employees are feeling, how they're using technology and leveraging technology. I can find my iPhone anywhere in the world. I can look on Twitter and find exactly what people are thinking at any moment, yet I'm using employee engagement surveys and performance management processes that are a year or 2 years old. That stuff is screwed up. And as part of this whole concept of HR from now to next, it's how do we move into this concept of the measure of now. So I wanted to start with those few comments, and what I'm going to do next is jump into some polling questions. And the polling questions we're going to jump into, I'm going to have the WebEx producer launch them here. The first polling question is going to be strictly tied to, are you happy or are you satisfied with your current HR solution? Now, HR solution means everything. So performance management to core HR to recruiting, et cetera, et cetera. And I realize it's broad, but I just want to see what you guys say. So just give it a yes or no. And this is going to help make sure that throughout the webinar, we tie back our comments to how you respond to these. So please go ahead and submit your responses. Guys, this is the measure of now. Remember, we're not waiting 6 months to get results. We might have to wait 6 seconds to get results, but we're not waiting 6 months to get results. We can see exactly based who's here, what your engagement is with your existing core HR system. Colin, are you there?
Yep.
What would you guess the response is going to be here? Most yes or most no?
Most no.
Give me a percentage. I'll bet you North Star's jersey.
I'm going to say 65% aren't happy.
Okay. Cool. Well, we should be able to get the results up in a second. 82%.
Oops.
Colin.
Just show me a jersey.
I don't know if it's North Stars or Dallas Stars or what it is I owe you, but definitely owe you something there. So 82% not happy, which isn't surprising. And once again, one of the things that I will talk about throughout is that one of the reasons that people aren't happy with their system isn't necessarily always the system. It's sometimes the expectations, it's sometimes how it's rolled out. There's lots of different reasons why people aren't happy, but 82% is an extremely high number. Let's go on to polling question number 2. And polling question number 2 starts to get into value, and this is, are your employees adopting your current HR solution? So, one of the things I talk about in the book is that, I think the word self-service is one of the stupidest things ever created. Forget the fact that I say that. I prefer, let's give employees and managers direct access to their information to do their jobs better versus self-service. But are your employees adopting your solution? And one of the reasons that this is an important question is because if you're not using a system today that was written for your employees, and you were using a system that was written for HR that you've somehow tried to expose to your employees, oftentimes you're going to find adoption is very, very difficult, if not impossible. So, Stephen, I know that in your organization, we've talked about this a lot. What percentage of people would you guess that employees are not adopting their current HR system?
Oh, I would guess that it's probably north of 80%.
Bingo. Wow, 83%. Good job. So, now, interestingly enough, I can't do my measure of now correlation, which I'd love to do, to actually see if there was a correlation between satisfaction and adoption. But if I was a betting man, I'd say that there is a huge amount of that. So let's talk now about how do we change that? How do we change that? So these are all organizations that are 1 year in. They're 1 year into their implementation and deployment of Workday, and I'm going to ask each of them to talk real quickly about what's their biggest success and what they've seen as their biggest success. And once again, please tweet questions or type them into the Q&A panel so we can get to them throughout the session. So, John, let's start with you. What's been the biggest success at McGraw-Hill Education now that you're live on the Workday system?
Well, I actually given this quite a bit of thought since I started just sifting through what potential possibilities are, and there's so many tangible possibilities out there, whether it be rollout of a solid talent succession module and plan with a process in place to try to track that. But the more and more I got to thinking, I thought really the biggest success we have right now since rolling out Workday is that Workday and HR are now out in front of the businesses. It's not just a side stream HR database that's keeping the information that we can pull reports on, and that's what we're going to leverage HR to do. Workday's out there as a solution. Workday's out there within the conversations of all our executive leaders of how we can better the businesses, how we can take advantage of the data, how we can work towards greater and better analytics, drive talent, and actually drive profits from that perspective. Just listening into a conversation this morning, we had our chief digital officer is actually weighing in on how he feels performance might be able to look within the Workday system. 5 years ago, I don't think someone of that level would even be too concerned with the actual process of performance. He's just looking for the results. But people are actually engaged in talking about how the HR processes are going to work and how it's going to better their businesses and continue to grow and make money for the company.
Hey, John, one of the things that actually leads me to, and it leads me to an interesting question, is maybe, just maybe, some of these processes aren't HR processes anymore, but they're truly business processes. I mean, would you agree? I mean, if you've got people like that talking about this, maybe that gets the audience thinking that maybe we shouldn't think about performance as an HR process, and that's been the wrong way of thinking about it, and that it truly is a business process.
I absolutely, truly agree. I think that there's a kind of a fine line between the two in a sense that the businesses, there are certain data elements and aspects of a business process that HR kind of owns, maybe because we're more familiar with how the output of data is going to translate. But at the same time, too, bringing the businesses, the line managers into those conversations so that they can also help kind of define how those processes should be driven and what is actually important within each of those business processes, and then actually trying to understand what type of data outcomes they're looking for from a business process or reporting or some type of analytics. The combination or snowball of all that information can potentially help to really tighten up a business process and make it something that people aren't just looking at as being task-driven, but maybe a results-driven process.
No, that's awesome. And I would say that 83% of people, when they say that they're not adopting their HR system, the reason they're not adopting that HR system is because it's simply that. It's an HR system and it's not a business system. So I think the more that we think about these processes as business processes and the less we think of them as HR processes, the better off we're going to be. Now, Colin, I know that you're on the same page with that thinking, but I'd love just to lead into that with your success story and after a year, what you guys have been able to accomplish.
Yeah, I think it's similar to what John just articulated, but I'll put a different spin on it, which is at the end of the day, this is a system that, one, enables business processes, but it also enables our team members. It used to be that if we had a life event change, be it an adoption of a child, be it marriage or divorce, as Jason articulated in his opening comments, the number of manual steps that we had to go through to make that happen on behalf of a team member was crazy. So you start to look at the time involved, the back and the forth, the misunderstandings, the email communications, the phone calls, and for all my friends who are HR practitioners on the phone, you're probably sitting there nodding your heads going, yeah, I can relate to that because I've got a pile of those on my desk right now. What we've noticed is having one platform to enable these transactions, along with integrations to our core providers of additional information and services, has taken the time to enable those changes and reduced it by probably half. And that's from a team member perspective. From our benefit admin perspective or our, kind of core HR admins or generalists, we've probably reduced the volume of email that they receive related to these types of questions and transactions by half. While that may not seem like a lot, but when you're managing 1,700 global employees with an average of about 350 emails a week, that starts to get significant.
Okay, no, that's great. That's great, Colin. So you'd say efficiency is one key component of it, and then tying that back to the effectiveness of the function, is another key component of it as well. A question came in that I think is really interesting, and that, how did you actually get the business to be part of these conversations? So instead of just HR doing it, how did you actually get the business to be part of it? I'd love to hear your thoughts about that. And maybe, John, we can start with you since you talked about it.
I think part of getting the business involved in the conversations is really trying to get an equal understanding of exactly what we're trying to do as a company. I know within the different business units, they all have different goals or agendas. But at the end of the day, we're all looking to turn a profit for whether it be shareholders or private company or what have you. And so by tying all those similar goals, values, or outcomes together, and then in a sense trying to work down from there in order to show what the advantages are and what the pluses are within the system to help achieve those goals, kind of brings everybody into the loop.
Okay, no, that's great. And Colin, on your side, the business has been, the business has been key. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so I think that the business has been key in two areas. I think first and foremost, again, at the end of the day, we're a software shop, so we always love to build things, and we can probably build them better, faster, and more expensive than anybody else. That being said, we started to look at the cost around streamlining these types of platforms and how it's going to enable the entire business, so we could actually start allocating funds back into what we do best, which is build call center platforms and technologies. Yep. So our businesses became very integral in that. The second thing, too, which we're starting to do now as we head into our fiscal planning for 15, is we're really starting to look at the data that we've gathered and how do we map that against commissions. And if there's any salespeople on the phone, my apologies in advance, but this is going to be a critical component for our compensation planning going forward when we start looking at metrics around total cost of sale. Typically, that would be a finance-driven initiative, but now we've got the sales organization plus our HR and our talent groups involved. So a year ago, those would have been three unique and separate activities, but now we're bringing them all under one umbrella.
That's great. Thank you guys for that. So those are some successes. Let's talk about learnings. So, one of the things that's really interesting to me in doing a webinar like this is getting a bunch of people on the phone who are either in the middle of a deployment or thinking about a deployment, things like that. So Stephen, let's start with you. What was your biggest learning? And if you could do something different, what would it be?
No, from a W.J. Bradley perspective, all of our broken processes really manifested themselves as we went through the implementation of Workday, because, we were lacking an HRIS solution. We are about 2,000 employees, and they were being managed on Excel spreadsheets and on the back of an envelope. And so the refinement of our processes and then the automation of those really manifested itself especially on what we refer to as the edge cases and all of the exceptions. And underneath the 80-20 rule, that's where our internal staff was spending all of their time, and it's also the area that was creating the biggest dissatisfier, if you will, for our internal customer, the employee. We also, in terms of what we would do different, we changed payroll providers. We would have done the payroll conversion before our Workday implementation because we had about a 2 to 3 month period of time where we were really doing double entry, and that created an awful lot of extra work as well as reconciliation effort. The other sort of thing that I think we would do differently, and you touched upon this, Jason, in that conversation about direct access versus self-service, is we would have prepared the employees for that cultural shift through, the changes coming and the readiness for change.
So, Stephen, interesting on that last point. Do you think that the employees don't have the skill set to be able to handle direct access, or do you think that it just wasn't marketed to them and the value wasn't shown to them as far as why you were rolling it out to them?
I would say that it was the latter. Our employees clearly have the skill sets necessary to get into an intuitive system like Workday. One example I can give you was our open enrollment. We brought up our benefits portal, and all of the employees gave great feedback on how intuitive it was, how it walked through step by step, how it laid out, the summary statement of benefit selection at the end. So I know they all had the skills to be able to use the system. It's just that creating the case for change and the marketing of the change, and quite frankly, the what's in it for you, to be able to use that direct access to service yourself rather than having to send an email, wait for a response. That response might not be the information you are actually looking for. And that power of direct access for us, especially on the benefit side, has been just a huge success for us.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that's really interesting around this is that in the past, if HR people didn't want to use the system, they either got fired or they went to look for another job. Now in this world, if employees don't want to use the system, they're not going to use the system, and they're going to tell their manager that it's a waste of their time, and the manager is going to say, okay, don't do it. So it's a major, major change in the value proposition that has to be done. And, I think there's a comment that just came in that said, I resonate with the comments about folks not being ready. I don't think people will ever be ready unless you show them value. Ready equals value when it comes to adoption, and I think that's really, really important to keep in mind. John, talk a little about your comments about your areas about the biggest learning, and if you could, what would you do different?
Yeah, the biggest learning, I think, and this is, again, probably similar to Stephen as well, but the biggest learning was the dedication or the amount of time or the direction that our change management and training approach took. We had a very aggressive rollout. I know some of the folks on the panel also have had similar experiences. And so I don't know if we paid as much attention or gave as much value into the change manager training aspect of things. I mean, we did do change management. We brought our executives in, but from an employer-manager perspective, we felt that the tool would stand on its own, that people would just accept the change because now we're in a sense, we've just bought the Cadillac of HR systems, if you will. And so instead of doing like road shows or actual one-on-one trainings, whether WebEx or live or what have you, we decided to go the route of like quick reference guides and basically postings out on the web or on our intranet homepage of how-tos. This is how you do something. Again, more transactional or task-based than value-based. And I think that's where we got caught up and tripped ourselves up. If we had to do it differently, if we could have approached it differently, maybe because of time or money or combination of both there, but we really should have probably paid more attention and maybe looked at some type of a hybrid approach. Maybe some live marketing to folks, providing information on what they're going to expect, what they can get out of the system through the appropriate use of it, how we can kind of shift the way McGraw-Hill Education will do business by using Workday, and then also obviously supplementing that with either how-tos or things like that, because no matter how we look at it, there is still a transactional component, and people want to know how they want to do something. We try to make that as easy as possible for them. I would also think that one of the things we should have concentrated on as well would be reporting upon our initial rollout. I think from an end user's perspective, the biggest and most powerful aspect of Workday is the access of data and the access of information and what folks can get out of the system And it also drives people in there on whether it's a daily basis or weekly basis or what have you. So rather than look at a reporting suite or dashboards as a Phase 2 item, it probably would have been best to keep it as part of a Phase 1 item, because that's the immediate value. The executives and line managers, people who have invested it not only from a business and a financial perspective, but from a marketing perspective and tried helping us along, they would have gotten that out immediately, and I think that would have probably helped aid in our immediate adoption of Workday.
Yeah, so John, I mean, that's such a key point that I just want to make sure that I reiterate it. A lot of organizations don't start with the outcomes. They just get the transaction in and then hope that they'll be able to do the reporting later on. If you don't define the outcomes ahead of time that you're trying to achieve, more than likely when it comes time to do reporting after implementation, you're going to be disappointed that you're not going to be able to get what you want out of the system. So very important to define those outcomes ahead of time. And if you define those outcomes ahead of time, that Phase 1 component is going to be seen as much more successful to the executives and the workforce, which is going to get a lot more fuel to the fire of moving on to Phase 2. So I think that's a really, really important point, and thank you for making it. How has Workday changed your business? Now, no one, I don't think, has stacks of paper. I mean, Colin, this isn't you, this picture, but no one has these stacks of paper on their desk, quite this high. But, how has Workday changed your business overall? And I think that this is really important because in the past, HR systems haven't been known to change business. They've been known as a way to help get business done, and they've sort of been the part that we've just had to have in the background. I think what we're starting to see, and at least for you three customers, you've actually seen Workday change your business. Can you talk about that and I think give the people on the webinar an opportunity to possibly fuel their business cases?
Yeah, so again, aside from kind of the obvious, the time savings in our age group, I think there's two other areas where our business has been benefited most positively. And the first is I'll speak at it from an IT perspective. So at the end of the day, I'm an IT guy, and I'm not in the business, quite frankly, of writing reports, and I don't want to be in the business of maintaining, reporting systems and all that stuff. I want to be the enabler to the business. And what we have found is when you choose the right platform for your business and you partner with your HR group, your sales group, your whatever group's involved, and IT takes that role of the consultant, all of a sudden it's no longer IT saying, here's a platform or a system you need to use. It's the business saying, here's the system I need you to enable. And that fundamental mindset changes the entire conversation, where we now have HR admins and sysadmins that sit in the HR group that make changes to our current business flows and the business rules and the business configurations. Why? I don't know what the latest and greatest, requirements from a legal perspective are in Germany. I don't know what is the most current, HR policy for the state of California. That's what our HR teams do. So why don't we put that power in their hands to enable it? Where I come into play is we manage the integrations and the data moving back and forth between different platforms and different systems to enable the entire business. And that's where I think, these types of platforms add huge value. The second point that goes overlooked sometimes is, at the end of the day, depending on how your organization is structured, people are your most important asset. And our talent group here has done a phenomenal job around change management. And the change management program that we built to roll out Workday is now what is the standard for every other major initiative we use inside the entire organization. So if we're putting in, new features into Salesforce.com, which is our sales platform, we use change management, which was developed around Workday. We're putting in a brand new finance package, same thing. So look at how this type of platform and these types of tools and programs can enable your entire business, not just HR. And then as John mentioned and as Stephen has mentioned, all of a sudden these other key executives start to pay attention and start to listen, and you'll be absolutely amazed at how you can basically reuse what you've already done for the overall success of the organization. that is how we've really changed the business here at Interactive.
No, that's great. Stephen, you want to talk about W.J. Bradley quickly?
Sure, thanks. I would reiterate that everything Colin said from the IT perspective in terms of using the decentralized model and enabling the business process owners to control their own workflow and their own reporting and their own, quite frankly, business intelligence out of the HR data. I will share one W.J. Bradley experience on how the business has changed with Workday. Mr. Bradley is a very entrepreneurial type individual and believes that people can do anything. And so one thing that he absolutely has driven into the organization, and Workday has allowed him to do that, is better career pathing and better performance management for our people. And so with Workday's capability to capture everyone's diverse profiles, we went through an exercise right after we turned the system up where all employees were required to load their LinkedIn profile. And if they didn't have a LinkedIn profile, then they were required to create it from scratch. And Bill used this data at annual performance planning time at the end of the year and the beginning of this year to help people grow in their careers. And obviously the benefit for Bradley is he had these human capital resources in our employee base, but didn't know what he had because didn't have that information in a way that was able to be easily consumed. So that's a process that clearly we've introduced with the introduction of Workday.
No, that's great. One of the questions I have that's come in that I want to make sure I get to before we move on is, the concept of a reduction in HR human capital headcount as part of negotiation to implement Workday. I think that's such an interesting question. I'd love, Colin, maybe we could start with you and then John move over to you to just talk about that because, I think one of the things that people try to do is keep cutting costs out of HR, and I'm not sure that necessarily that's the right thing to do to make the function more strategic. So I'd love your thoughts on that and how that's happened within your organization. So Colin, can we start with you?
Sure, and I don't think it's a question of cutting. I think it's a question of not growing as fast. And I think what we looked at was that very question. Everybody was asking us, well, how many headcounts are you going to be able to reduce by putting in this type of platform? And we were adamant, and we said 0. We're not looking at this as a reduction, but what we are looking to do is reduce the future headcount growth inside of our HR organization because we wanted to pull some of the more manual or administrative tasks off of the existing team. So when we were modeling this out from a cost perspective, we conservatively figured that we would put between 10 and 12,000 hours back into our HR group. And if you think about that, that's the equivalent of, 5 or 6 FTEs that we don't need to hire. So it never became a question of we're going to remove people from their roles. It's a question of can we maintain and grow the business with what we have. Subtle difference, subtle messaging difference, but the reality of it is we have not had to increase our headcount by anything more than what you would expect given that we're adding, 300 people a year to the overall organization globally, and that just naturally in and of itself says you need to get more people to enable it. But as it relates to, reductions, no. Time savings, absolutely huge. As I said, we're probably going to put 10 to 12,000 hours back into the business this year alone.
So their roles changed based on the implementation.
Right. They became more what we would call value add or analytical as opposed to administrative or, again, I know this sounds extremely harsh, but, data entry. Get away from data entry. Let's do analytics. Let's do, value add to the business. That's where our team is now focused as opposed to, hey, how do I change my beneficiary designation on my benefit plan here in the U.S.?
No, that's great. Thanks for that. I think from the interest of time, I'm going to move on to the next piece, which is another polling question. And we'll launch this polling question. And I guess one of the things that drives a lot of things that Workday can do is change. And I'd love to get feedback on this. Is your organization undergoing some of this significant change, whether they be organizational shifts, mergers or acquisitions, leadership shifts, or all of the above? I think that change is one of those things that's perpetual now, and I think that every organization goes through it. One of the things that's handcuffed us around change is many of our old systems that we use today for HR that were written before the internet was ever born that don't allow us to do these types of things. So I'd love to get your response here. And John, what do you think here? You think for you guys who just spun off a part of your business and reinvented yourselves, what would you guess? Most people are going through something here?
I think they have to. I think you're going to get a majority of people in all the above, because I just think everybody's businesses are ever changing, consistent, and all the time. And that's the only way they're staying on top of things.
You want to bet lunch at Max and Irma's?
Ooh, what's the tie?
Close. It's a bad way to look at it, because most of them are going through something. But organizational shifts for sure, all of the above being tied for second. So I think that those we'll definitely do lunch. But I think those are really, really important. And when we look at those things like organizational shifts, leadership shifts, and all of these combined, these are the things that organizations struggle with their old ERP systems. So that ties back to the business change, but it also ties back to adoption. Because if I can't keep up with these changes, it makes adoption really, really hard. So, John, can you start by talking about how adoption is going of these tools? And have you really shifted? Have you really shifted from having an HR system that you maybe rolled a little bit of it out to people to having a system where most of it is workforce facing and HR just uses the data to make decisions?
Yeah, sure. Adoption, I would be absolutely truthful and say it's still a component or an aspect of our process that we're still working on. I think there's still a throwback culture that still views HR as a transactional-based organization. I hate to use the word paper pusher, but for lack of a better term, I will. But what we're trying to do is slowly but surely kind of change the way they're looking at that. And a lot of that really has to do with the way that they're able to access the systems by concentrating on business processes, enhancing them, making them easier to use, working and building on, again, reporting suites. And I sort of go back to that a lot because it's been a concentration of ours over the last 6 months. But with that reporting suite and getting people to understand where the value of that data lies, and where the value of having somebody in HR more analytical based rather than transactional or administrative based, why that ROI in a sense will give you a much more larger return on your investment than somebody who's just entering in information because an employer manager doesn't want to. So we keep looking at better ways that we can go about doing this, helping with the adoption. I'm hoping for next year we're probably going to start targeting more mobile capabilities. I mean, it's out there, we're using it, but we're not using it to the greatest extent that it can be used. So each quarter or half a year that we continue to progress, we keep looking at options and capabilities and availabilities, opportunities is the word I'm looking for, to continue to get the Workday system, to get the functionality and the value out to our line managers. And the more and more they start using it, the more and more they're starting to see that value and be able to, be more accepting that, hey, this is where we're going with it, and it makes sense.
Stephen, how about you?
So I would summarize W.J. Bradley's adoption plan as adoption is not an option. And I mentioned earlier that we required the employees to use the system for open enrollment. We required them to put in their job profiles. And then after I say that, I would also tell you that our adoption has been mixed, and probably no surprise, that the employees that use the system on a regular basis and have a need have really adopted it well and really given great feedback about its functionality, the intuitive ease of use. Those that don't have that need, and unfortunately, in some smaller departments, some of the HR functions, you may not perform them that often. And so in that area, we haven't had the adoption that we would like, but what we have done is, we have somebody had talked about this earlier about not, cutting heads, that what we've done is we've established more of a support group on an informal basis in the HR generalist community where the managers can get their questions answered by, a live person where they can actually take control of the manager's screen and actually, guide them through right online to complete that self-service task. And that has really helped break down that fear, if you will, of making a mistake on the part of the managers. But overall, I would say our adoption has been very strong, and mostly the reason for that is the requirement that we have that people can't get things done without using Workday.
Oh, that's great. I think that that's a huge way to do it, to drive adoption, is to A, make it mandatory, but then B, continue to show the value, which I think, leads us to this next discussion point, which is if people actually see their data being used, if people see the data being used and understand that from a reporting standpoint, if they're not using these tools, either the data doesn't work or they're being left out, it's a huge, huge piece, whether it be managing talent or whether it be actually going through and understanding exactly how the workforce is working today. So when we think about what are we measuring, I know that this is one of those things that we talked about in the pre-call. Colin, can you talk about that? I mean, I know that time is important to you and some of these other things are really important in your business. What are you measuring and what are the key things that you designed in your business processes that you wanted to get out of Workday?
Yeah, so I think time is one, manual efforts are two, and I think that going forward, we're getting away from all these disparate systems based on the business unit with which you're associated inside of Interactive. So we have this philosophy here that we're calling the core four. So we're going to have 4 technology platforms that become the core of our business. Obviously, Salesforce is one for sales, opportunity management, quoting, lead management, marketing, all those good things. We have a finance platform that we're putting in. We're replacing our customer-facing support platforms. And then we have Workday as our HR platform because at the end of the day, it feeds and has impacts on so many strategic decisions we're making inside of the business. The one thing that I did a little bit of research on prior to this call was we recently completed an acquisition in the last 90 days. And with Workday, what normally would have taken us about 5 months to integrate, we managed to get integrated in 35 days. So, again, when I look at measurement, 5 months versus 35 days, that's huge. And just not only from the time perspective of the people involved, but also from the cost perspective of maintaining these other platforms and systems. So, when we look at measurement, we look at cost measurement, we also look at time measurement. And then again, how do we have our resources allocated the right way as it relates to sales and marketing and product and all those pieces? And Workday, quite frankly, is one of the backbones that drives those decisions. So that's where we focus our measurements. And again, we're getting pretty good at looking for the trends as well.
And what I love is you're not measuring those typical HR metrics, time to fill, cost per hire, stuff like that. You're really measuring things that are tied back to business value.
Well, yeah, and the other thing too, Jason, you bring another one to mind, which is, so we have a couple of challenges here in Indianapolis in terms of hiring. So one of the things that we look at is, what are we spending as a percentage of recruiting efforts for third-party recruiters? So if you think that we're paying, 18 to 20% on base salary, that starts to add up a bit. So now all of a sudden we start to look at how do we leverage different channels or different venues or avenues for recruiting talent here to the indie marketplace. And again, a year ago, 2 years ago, we couldn't do that. Why? We had so many disparate systems, but now we can do it. And that's how we measure it. So again, as I tell our vice president of HR, I'd rather take the money we save and drive it back into the business in terms of programs and education and certifications, as opposed to paying recruiters for talent acquisition. So again, we have a finite bucket of money, so how do we allocate it accordingly?
And Stephen, you're on the Workday platform for both HR and financials. So having everything together has to be I would assume, a huge advantage from a measurement standpoint. Can you talk to that?
Yes, no, I can. The decision to go with the consolidated platform was based on driving cross-functional synergies and trying to break down some of our functional silos. We knew we were going to get some of those benefits, but I can give you some very practical examples of where, from a workflow perspective and from a business process reengineering perspective, having those things merge together really opens up some opportunities for process improvement and process efficiency. From a measurement perspective and reporting perspective, that link between the financial statements and the ability to drill down, and no surprise to anybody on this call, into your people and what we call people-related costs is just incredible by having that link right back to your financial statements and right back to the GL. And obviously in a business like ours, 60 to 65% of our costs are people, and then when you include people-related costs, that number jumps up to about 80%. So having the ability to measure that has really been very powerful. One other sort of plus that has surfaced in the area of reporting and measurements is the ease at which that data can be combined and reported when you're on that type of a consolidated platform.
No, I think that's great. And as we've been going along, for those who have been submitting questions, I've been trying to answer them and weave them into the discussion. So for some folks like Tan and others who've been submitting questions, hopefully you'll see that these guys are answering them as we're going along. What I want to do real quickly is I want to jump to this last question, which is, what would you change and what's next? I want you to hear from each of these panelists as far as what they would do different, if anything, and what's next. Let's start with John, and then we'll go to Stephen, and then we'll go to Colin. And if there's some other questions that we've missed, we'll get back and get to those. So, John, what would you change, if anything? And would you still choose Workday, A, and then B, what's next on your agenda?
Sure, absolutely. I think if I had to change, or if I had the power to change something, I definitely would have chosen Workday again. As a matter of fact, I would have raised the ante a little bit and said I'd like a consolidated platform that would include the benefits, payroll, finance, and basically everything that Workday has to offer. From my perspective, and being kind of responsible for a lot of the workforce analytics, I start to salivate in thinking about the pluses of having all that data and reporting available in one system, and how much we could probably provide out without all the integrations or cross-references between multiple other systems where needed. So that would be one. Stronger focus on our data infrastructure when we did our implementation. I know I mentioned something about change management, but because of the aggressiveness of the timeline, we had a little bit of a lift and shift from one system to another regarding the data. So I would have loved to have had a little bit more time to concentrate on that actual infrastructure setup prior to a go-live before moving forward. And then I mentioned the focus on reporting prior to go-live as well. From a McGraw-Hill Education perspective, moving forward, we're continuing to look towards leveraging the talent capabilities within Workday and succession planning and analytics that we can draw from that. We have a huge shift right now within the education business, we're really no longer a publishing company because we're totally moving away from the textbooks and moving more towards a digital type of talent and applications and away from the content. So we're absolutely looking at continuing to enhance talent and reporting and the business process associated with that. And then just the overall data infrastructure that I kind of alleviated further. We just did a project to completely redo our job profiles, job families, and job family groups, which is going to be fantastic moving forward because that creates the solid infrastructure and groundwork to be able to take our data and then continue to move forward with the building blocks that we wanted to do to eventually get to the type of information that we want to report out on, the type of business processes that are supporting that data outcome. So a lot of work to do, but I guess it's called job security.
Good. So you've got the foundation there, and now it's moving forward. Stephen, how about yourself?
So to sort of reiterate John's point, we would, from a implementation perspective, go for more of a home run approach and not so much of the piecemeal approach. We rolled out Workday over the 2013 year period in probably 4 or 5 releases, and going for that home run big bang approach really would have been much more beneficial from a change management perspective, from a cost perspective, as well as from an integration perspective. Obviously, taking that big bang or home run approach, has more inherent risk. But to quote, no death by 1,000 duck bites with that particular approach. In terms of what's next, we obviously have a very solid foundation both on the HR side and on the financial side. We are expanding our footprint in time tracking this year, and that will be done before the end of the year. On the roadmap for 2015 is recruiting to move through the Workday applicant tracking product and off of one of the third-party products that we use today. And then really far out is actually to reevaluate payroll. And obviously payroll has some of the challenges, and there are a few different models, so that one's not as firm on our roadmap.
Okay, no, that's great. And the last thing I would want is to be bitten by a duck 1,000 times. That's a new saying I've never heard before. So thanks for that.
Oh, it's a painful process. Picture a Canadian goose too.
I will. I'll dream about that tonight. So last but not least, Colin, see if you can beat those duck bites. What's next for you?
So we're looking at talent and performance, but I just checked the attendee list, and ironically enough, the PM who helped implement our initiative is actually on the call. So if you hear a thud, it's when I tell everybody that I wouldn't change a thing. We pushed Workday through to hit open enrollment. We started late in the year. We looked at about 122 days from an implementation perspective. So I wouldn't change a thing. Now, the one thing I will tell you is there was a lot of pre-work that was done. So anybody who is crazy enough to try and get this platform put in 120 odd days or so, if you know what your processes are today and you know what you want to change or what you want to streamline, you'll be really successful. So this gets into that whole change management concept and discussion that we've already talked about. But realistically, once we get talent performant, it's just going to be more integrations, more analytics, more data, more value add and visibility into our business. But quite frankly, I wouldn't change a thing.
That's great. Thanks for that. So you guys, we're at the top of the hour. There have been a number of questions that have come in. Most of them we've answered. There have been some that have been sent to the panelists directly, I see. And what we'll do is we'll make sure that those get to Workday and get all of those back out. So it looks like based on the questions, I think we're at the top of the hour. Time to wrap up. So once again, I just want to thank you all for attending. I'd love to, I wish you guys could all give a round of applause to the panelists. You can do that. They won't hear you, though. Thank you guys very much for attending. It's always fun from a panelist standpoint. Always fun doing these sessions with you. And if you're looking for more information about anything that's here, feel free to follow that hashtag Workday, WDAY, on Twitter, and you'll be able to get in touch with any of the panelists, and Workday will be monitoring that as well. So thank you all for attending, and have a great rest of the day. Talk soon. Bye-bye.